Dr. Jazz.
For taking the time, appreciate it.
Dr. Jazz.
Oh, thanks. Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, and thanks for sending the CD, by the way. I still have a CD player.
Yeah, well, I do too. I love CDs. I mean,
Oh, man.
I love LPs, and I'm hoping the CDs never go away, but probably they have already, and I just don't know it.
But yeah, but on gigs, we still sell them. I mean, I had quite a big tour last year, and we sold so many CDs, but
Great.
people above 60 bought them. So that's the
Well, that's me.
yeah, that's one thing. And well, yeah, I was like,
Yeah.
shit, man, what about the youngsters? Come on. But no, I mean, I listened to the new album, like you said, the recommendation, put it on the whole thing, and it's such a beautiful record. And
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I really love it. Yeah.
the sound also, man, it's like whew, beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah. We went into a really good studio, and my instruments are, I don't have to look for basses anymore.
Yeah. I wanted to start with this one. I mean, how did you decide, especially for the tunes, like there's like quite a wide variety of everything, like from, jazz standards to Coltrane to Henry Grimes, for instance, or like,
Yeah.
what was the story behind the tunes?
Well, my interests have always been varied within the realm of anything you could call jazz music. Other than that, I'm rather myopic, but if it can fall under the heading of jazz, I love to do it. And of course, being a bass player, knowing how to play tunes is a huge part of that, and you have to love it. You love the function of the instrument, which for me is a priority.
Mm.
And then, the music has always grown in every direction, fortunately. So between Timothy and I, it's easy to accommodate all those parts of our personalities. And the presentation in a suite form is just, if I can't remember the last time I didn't actually perform in that manner,
Really?
Unless,
Oh, wow.
okay. Unless it was somebody very new to me and they were in charge and they said, we're going to stop every tune, or they just did, or whatever. Mostly I do that. And so it was natural for me and Timothy. We also play in a larger ensemble with the great Bansuri player, Steve Gorn, and the beautiful violinist, Eva Bitova, who's from the Czech Republic. Yeah. And so, and that band has been around for, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 years now. We don't get to play often because everybody's schedule is very different. But so Timothy and I met there, and to hear him not only sing, but the sound he gets on the guitar, it's so beautiful. So we talked about this duo for about a year, and then we rehearsed like once a week for a few months.
Oh, wow.
And we went into the studio, and now the record's out. It's a beautiful thing, and it's been received very well. So I'm hoping, by next year we'll be touring pretty consistently with it.
Do you have any plans of coming to Europe with this one, or?
Well, I would love to have plans to come to Europe with it, but it's a matter. There's an agent in the Netherlands who has taken some interest, and so we'll see. There's nothing on the books yet, but if anyone is listening and they'd like to talk about it, I would love to talk about it.
Yeah, it's a beautiful, and it's easier also since you're only two, to put it on the road. That's might be easier. So yeah,
it's very easy, and as you said, it covers a lot of ground. We do Coltrane pieces, we do Ornette pieces, we do standard, we do free music on it. And so it covers everything we both love. And so it's easy. We have a natural repertoire. And of course, Timothy's harmonic singing is just off the charts. It's such a love thing.
It's a nice addition, to I mean, what I love about this one is like, most people know you, or including myself, actually, from playing with Joe McPhee, or I mean, I want to touch those areas, obviously, and Matthew Shipp and all these incredible players who are more on the outside playing there on the inside, I'll put it like that. But and here you play standards, and I'm not used that of you, but you sound amazing, like the beautiful melodies. And like how much did standards or like play in your role in the beginning? I mean, did you go through all that school of...
Well, I always loved it. I can't say, for many years I lived on the West Coast of the US. And so there it was easier to have a wide variety of experiences. And so I did play a lot of standards.
Okay.
And I learned how to love them. But my career, and I use, we'll use air quotes, my career really ended up being in the more avant-garde areas. And it was like, for me, there were times when I couldn't let people know I knew how to play a tune. Which,
sure, okay.
Because they would think less of me. So, and I really resented that. So, so I started, finding outlets where that doesn't happen. And all the people I play with now, Matthew has an encyclopedic knowledge of tunes. Charles Gale was a master, is a master. Joe the same way, So the problem with this music would be that a lot of people don't have a standard of musicianship for it. And to me, the music is my whole message. The sound is my whole message. So to have somebody not like something because something about it, it was always too weird for me.
Yeah. No, it's like too many times limitations. I agree. If you're in the free zone, you're there.
Right.
And if you play standards or straight ahead, you're there. And it's not many mashing, actually. When I check the musicians, like...
Yeah. Well, sometimes it's a matter of preference, with other players, and sometimes it's a matter of the market.
Yeah, I think that's primarily, that's primarily.
Yeah. People want to pigeonhole you, or the market wants to pigeonhole you.
Yeah.
And then that's the experience people have. But just like I said, for me, music is a healing force, and it's just, music is music. And you have to, for me, it's important to know something about music, I will say, because that's what gets the message across.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's stupid to limit yourself. You take a look at the greats, and they played everything. So that's But I wanted to ask you this thing, like your interest in music, like when you were a teenager, what was the main reason you entered the jazz world, actually? I mean, like, or let's say improvisation, or what was that moment? You remember a moment, like?
Well, for me, I think my first introduction to playing music, I was a teenager, and my older brother, who's now passed, was the local Hendrix clone. And he was, he was the most natural musician I ever met. And he needed a bass player. So they got me a bass and told me where to put my fingers. And so I kept on, I did that. And then in my high school, I walked into the band room and I saw a string bass kind of nailed to the wall. And I asked the band teacher if I could try it. He said, yeah. Took it down. I could do nothing with it. and he put me in touch with this man, David Cobb, who was a legend in the Northeast. And David inspired me so much. I mean, in the beginning, I would practice all day, every day, you know, and I learned in a classical sense. But I always improvised because it's how I taught myself. I mean, I had two teachers who I really consider my major teachers, and their thing and my thing with my students is if I can teach you how to teach yourself, that's the whole thing. Yep. So I taught myself through, I had lots of problems that books didn't necessarily address. So I made up my own exercises, and that's how I got interested in improvisation. In college, I got to study with Bill Smith, who in the classical world goes by William O. Smith. He was an original member of Dave Brubeck's octet, and Stuart Dempster, great trombonist from the Deep Listening School. And they both had a lot of classical training. They both had a lot of improvisation, and they both had a lot of jazz. So that kind of developed my interest in all those areas. I guess, you know, I could go on, but maybe
but did you then like
too much?
No, please. I mean, that's why I'm asking. Like, but did you then like explore? You know, did you then dive into the history of bass players like Paul Chambers or Henry Grimes, like Jimmy Garrison, all these guys? And
yeah, you know, at first when you start, I mean, you want to be everybody's bass player, so you try to be, you know, you go to school on everybody you can, you know, Ray Brown, Oscar Pettiford, Jimmy Blanton, you know, you name it. Later on, Stanley Clarke. I mean, you know, there's historically you see all these revolutions in bass playing that happen at different times. Yeah. And when you're young, you want to be that, you want to be that, you want to be that. So you go to school on all of them as much as you can, and then you figure out where you're at, you know, and end up, you know, for many years as a youngster, I was a bass warrior, and now I'm a music warrior. I don't, you know, I play what I play because it's the message I want to deliver, not because I want to sound like someone else.
Oh, sure. Yeah, definitely. I mean, everyone has, when I started, I played like, I wanted to play like Pat Metheny, but that was like, you know, then I discovered Ornette and I was like, oh shit, man, I want to sound like Ornette. And then, but once you get older, obviously, all that influence, you become yourself, I guess, and make your own bread. And
you have to have your own voice.
Yeah. Like you mentioned the West Coast. When did you move to the West Coast?
At the very end of 1975, I moved to Seattle to study with Jim Harnett, who was principal bass in the Seattle Symphony, and I actually stayed there for 30 years.
Wow. Yeah. How was that like? I mean, on the West Coast.
Well, again, for me, it was great because Seattle wasn't what it didn't have the name it does now. Yeah. And there was a lot of great talent. There's also a lot of radical history in the Northwest that people don't know about. But it was cool because there were also a lot of great players. And the best part for me was I got to develop at my own pace and my own style, you know, so like I didn't have to, like in the 90s, it was like people were playing Balkan folk music and calling it jazz. I didn't have to do that. I didn't have to play circus music, which was another trend, and call it jazz. I mean, I actually played for Barnum and Bailey. You know, so I got to develop in any direction I wanted, whenever I wanted. And that was a great part of Seattle. And it's also, like I said earlier, it was so open that lines crossed, where in New York, that doesn't happen all that much.
Yeah. Did you already start leading bands on the West Coast as well? I mean, there's
Yeah.
one album I saw, ours, which is a sextet. I can't get it anywhere. I couldn't find it, but like I
Oh
saw that
yeah,
you started band leading. So
ours was my very first LP. I think it was 1983.
already,
And interestingly enough, the drummer on that record is the man who runs Origin Records now.
oh, okay,
And
wow,
John Bishop, which is the record that Inside Voice, Outside Voice is on. And so yeah, that's really a classic. That one's, I mean, I don't know that I should say any of my records are classic, but it's a collector's item. I'll say that. And then while I was still in the Northwest, a man named Keith Knox contacted me, who was the artistic director for Silk Heart Records. It's a Swedish label.
Yeah.
And he asked me if I wanted to do a record. Now, he found me because of that Ours record was picked up by Cadence, kind of championed by Bob Rouge. And Bob Rouge and Silk Heart had a connection. So Keith asked me if I wanted to do a record. Yeah, of course. So he asked me to make up a budget, and then he kind of laughed at me and doubled it. He said, "No."
Oh wow, okay.
And that record is called the Michael Bisio Quartet in Seattle, and it's all people who had lived in Seattle for a long time. The trumpet player Ron Soderstrom, just an amazing musician. He taught himself how to play trumpet on a garden hose when he was 5 years old.
Man, okay.
And then there was Rick Mandyke, who moved from upstate New York to Seattle, like I did. And Rick is a genius also. You know, Rick's one of the few people I know, if he can put his hands on an instrument, he can play it, regardless of what it is. And of course, Tio Sutton, who's gone now. And Tio was my running partner for many years. And he was a Philly boy who moved to Seattle. And he just had that great feel, you know, and everything felt good.
Yeah.
So those were basically my starting. Yeah.
Did you meet? I mean, when I look at the years, Joe McPhee, when you were still on the West Coast, right?
Yep.
How did that story with Joe begin, actually? I mean, because you seem to have like a really long connection and incredible rapport.
We do. Joe was really good friends with a man named Craig Johnson. And Craig was from very old school Seattle. And in the 50s, Craig moved to Paris to be a painter. And then he moved to upstate New York in the Hudson Valley, and he was librarian for a monastery there. And in a bar one night, he met Joe, because they both liked to smoke pipes, and were talking tobacco. And then Craig started the original CJ Records, and he bought, having never recorded before, he bought a reel-to-reel, and he made Joe's first 3 records, which he put out himself, LPs, and actually Had Art bought those and re-put them out and started Had Art. And then Craig and Joe worked for Had Art for 30 years. And so in the late 80s, Craig moved back to Seattle, and he would come hear me, and I met him, and we became great friends. He's a beautiful person. He couldn't see very well by then, so I would bring him out shopping once a week. And Craig liked to drink beer. And so shopping was really, we went out and drank beer all afternoon and bought a couple of groceries along the way. But so Joe would come out to visit Craig, and Craig introduced me to Joe. And probably I'm mid-90s, I guess, you know, maybe 93, maybe 94. And then Joe asked me to play, and, you know, it was an instant connection. And, you know, I love him. I mean, he's just a great person.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
You know, on those records that I have you on, like, it's just like, the connection you guys have. It's so beautiful. There's one that record with Eyvind, Kang as well. I think it's the first one you guys did, right? That's so beautiful. It's like,
and that also has Stuart Dempster on it, and Stuart's son Lauren, who was playing cello on it. It's a
nice record.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's like nice to hear you. I mean, Joe is like one of those, I think, most underrated players in jazz. You know, like the musicians know him, but like wider, I think he's still quite should have wider recognition in my eyes and ears.
Oh yeah. Joe he's very interesting. You know, he grew up since he was 4. He's lived in Poughkeepsie, and at the beginning of his career, he worked in a factory, and on weekends he would fly to France.
Oh wow!
Play wherever he could, and then he'd fly back to work, and then blah blah blah, and then within a few years, of course, he's Joe McPhee, and he got to quit the factory gig.
Wow, I didn't know that. Wow, interesting. Yeah, he would be a nice guy to talk to. I think, like, if he would want to do that, of course. But why did you then decide actually to move to New York, since the West was working in a way?
In about 2005, I moved back, and a former marriage was breaking up, and my son was at Columbia University. And since the 90s, I've been coming back to New York to work more and more. So it just made sense. You know, it made sense, because I wasn't, my career was taking a certain shape, and that shape didn't necessarily fit what I was doing in Seattle anymore. So I needed to move somewhere, and I moved to New York, and I got a room in an apartment that I was paying more than my mortgage was in Seattle for an 8x10 room. And then I became a gypsy for a while. And now recently, my wife and I have just bought a house in Gloversville, New York. So what you see behind me, besides my basses, is our new house.
That's nice.
Yeah.
How was it in the beginning, entering the New York scene? I mean, who were the first connections you actually made when you came here? I mean, you probably knew quite many people already, right? Or
yeah, I did. I knew a lot of people because I had done some traveling, and people would come and we would hang out, and of course knowing Joe, and then when Charles Gale, when the Knitting Factory first got into artist management, Charles was like their flagship, and they sent Charles to the West Coast. So I toured with him annually, which was a great experience, a beautiful experience. So I knew a lot of people, like Matthew came out, and Matthew and I both had records on Silk Heart, so we were like label mates rather. And we talked when he would come out to Seattle, and then when I moved back, we lived not 2 blocks from each other. So we ran into each other on the street and stop and get coffee and start talking, and we should play. And even the first time we talked, we knew this had to happen. I mean, most of my enduring relationships have been kind of whole from the first meeting. It's like, this person and I have a connection that is deeper than anything I could really hope for. And Matthew is like on that level. We just connect instantly and quickly, and are instantly as quickly. It's quicker than quickly. But and it's always been that way. We didn't have to. It's better, but we didn't have to develop it. We didn't have to wait for it.
I mean, you played with him, right? Like what, more than 13 years, right, or something like that?
Yeah, it's 14 years now. And
14, wow.
actually we started the first thing we did was, I think, in 2006.
Already. Well, okay.
And we played a composition of, he had a commission from the Kitchen, which is a presenting organization in New York. And he asked me to play that. And then we made a couple of records as the postmodern jazz quartet with Kang on vibes and Michael T.A. Thompson on drums. And then in 2009, the Matthew Shipp trio was invited to Sardinia, and he needed a bass player, so he asked me to come. And of course, I was thrilled. And at the end of the gig, he asked me to join the trio. And
that's with on drums, sir.
Yes, it was with until 2014, and then now it's Newman.
Yeah.
And in fact, we're going in the studio tomorrow, which was kind of a surprise to me.
Wow.
So sometime in the new year, in the early 2024, there'll be a new Matthew Shipp trio.
Oh man, beautiful. Oh man, okay, super. Yeah. I love this trio because the rapport between you guys, it's so beautiful. It's just like,
yeah, it's really nice. And Newman is such a genius.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it's like, you know, he makes everything easy. So
yeah,
it's good.
Yeah, I listen. I mean, I did this talk with Matthew last year. I think we talked about World Construct. The record is so beautiful to hear you.
Oh, thank you. Yeah,
it's so much music there. Really, it's incredible.
That's like the high point for the trio, and he, you know, he was wondering what to do next, actually, and just this morning he texted and said, "Well, we're going in tomorrow." I said, "Oh, okay." So he knows what's next now.
So how does this go usually? Like, let's say you're going into the studio tomorrow. Are you just going to freely improvise, or are you going to play some tunes? Or
well, it's not. Matthew comes in with a concept, and he comes in with a concept and a strategy. And once in a while, he'll have constructs, but generally not. He'll describe what he wants, and he'll set up, you know, he's a very smart man, and sometimes he'll set up something that you're uncomfortable with because that's what he wants to hear. So it's when once we enter the studio, he knows we very rarely even change the sequence of, you know, we record in that sequence, and because he has a plan. And the plan, you could call the composition, and it is a composition.
How does this usually look like? I mean, what's
it doesn't
the plan?
You know, I don't get any music.
Okay.
I don't get there's no paper involved.
Okay.
But he does know exactly what I mean, in a very concrete way, he knows exactly what he wants to happen, and it's up to us to realize it in the manner that we do. You know, he's also allows for, we have our input under his guidance. So it's very cool. And sometimes it can be like, wow, you really want me to do this? Okay. So, you know, and it always works out. I mean, he's really a guy in a million, you know. I mean, his ability to conceptualize things is pretty off the charts.
Yeah, I love that because, like you said, for me it sounds almost composed. I know it's improvised, right? But it's sometimes it's just like as if it's written because it's so much makes sense. You know what I mean? It's like really incredible when I hear you guys play. It's
yeah. In 14 years, I think we've rehearsed maybe 3 times total.
Wow. So I mean, so obviously he just presents you a concept, but then you don't discuss or talk about music, how to do it, or
not usually.
no, right?
No,
That's
he's a
incredible.
leader.
That's incredible. Yeah, I love that.
He puts his concept out. You do the best you can.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah, it's incredible. It's so tight, but obviously, you know, you've played together for such a long time, and he's
Yeah.
gonna be with Newman for what, 10 years
Well,
now with him almost, right?
Yeah,
So,
almost 10 years. Yeah.
yeah,
That's just
beautiful. Well, looking forward to the new one, man. Beautiful. Yeah,
Yeah.
awesome. But you mentioned Charles Gale. I have one record to look up with the trio. With I think it's with Michael Wimberly on drums, and
It-
playing with Charles. How was? I mean, you mentioned it was beautiful. Like you know, he's again one of those undersung heroes, almost like of jazz. Like, how did you start playing with
yeah,
him? I mean,
Charles is, well, it's like I said, it was really what was that club I mentioned now? I've forgotten now. It was the big one in New York for many years. The Knitting Factory.
Okay.
The Knitting Factory decided to get into artist management. So they started putting out tours. And Charles was like their flagship. You know, Charles had this street cred. And so he fit a mold that they wanted to promote.
Mm.
And Charles is not a mold person. I'm not saying he bought into it, but so anyway, he would come out to the West Coast, and they didn't want to, you know, send the whole band. So Wayne Horowitz was connected to Michael Dorff, and Wayne was my neighbor in Seattle for a number of years.
Oh, really? Oh, wow. Oh, cool.
Yeah. And we used to play a lot. And so he recommended me for the gig. And the first time it was me, him, and Bob Meyer on drums.
Yeah.
Then after that, they started bringing Michael out too. And we would, you know, probably from the mid 90s till I moved really. So probably to about 2005. At first, those first few years, we would tour every year, and we'd go from Vancouver, BC to Long Beach, California. Down, there's a highway 5, Interstate 5. And we'd probably do a dozen stops along the way. And Charles was great. It was great to travel with, really smart man, great memory. And just like I said, a consummate musician. I mean, to stand next to him, the whole history of the saxophone goes by every minute and a half. You know, it's like, wow, you know, talk about going to school on people. You know, Charles could play anybody, and he was himself.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Wow, so nicely put, man. Yeah, no, because I know you were in New York already when you still played with him, right? So that's why I wanted to know your history together. It's a
West Coast.
Yeah, West Coast. What about I have another record with you with Louis Belogenis and Sonny Murray. Like, how was that like for you? You know, he's like one of the. How was he like when you played together?
Great. I mean, he was great. We played a concert the night before, and it didn't go very well, and I was upset, and I told Louis, I said, man, I'm not going to be there tomorrow. And so Louis and I stayed on the phone all night, and he talked me into it. And so the next day I went in, and it worked great. Wow. So, I mean, you know, Sonny was a genius. He had his quirks, however.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
And he decided somewhere along the line, I mean, that night, he didn't really care for me, and he made it very obvious. And in fact, it was one of the first times, it wasn't one of the first times, but I realized what a community the Lower East Side was, because after all he put me through on stage, when it came time to be introduced, it was like a standing ovation for me.
Mm.
And it was like, so, I mean, the Lower East Side is a great place. It's a great community of musicians, and it's a family. You know, it really is. It's nice. But anyway, I'm grateful to have had the experience. I can't say it was my best experience.
Yeah, no, sure, yeah, I believe you. Yeah, man, yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, no, so nice to hear also these things. You know, it's like, because that's also part of the story, right? That we do. So I mean, but you mentioned the West Coast. Like, when is, on the other hand, Europe does come into your touring schedule for the first time? I mean, when did you go to Europe for the first time?
Yeah, it wasn't until 2000. I was
okay.
here for the first time, and that was with Joe. Joe McPhee put together a band called Joe McPhee and the World Bass Quartet.
Oh, okay.
So it was Joe, Dominic Duvall, Paul Rogers, a great
Really? Oh man.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
I love Paul. Yeah.
And Claude Chimichian, also a wonderful French player.
Yeah.
And we had a villa in Provence where we stayed for about a month, and we would do day trips out from there, and we played almost every day. And there actually is a record from the live concerts.
Oh, I have to find this one. Okay.
Yeah, Devils, Angels, and Haints.
Okay.
H-A-I-N-T-S, and it's on CJR Records.
Okay, I have to find this one. Wow, because it's like four basses. That's already
yeah.
That's a heavy one, man.
Yeah. We were at a festival in Le Mans, I think, and David Murray was on it. I happened to hear him say to Joe, he says, "Man," he says, "that's so interesting." He says, it's like you got a pack of wild dogs chasing you."
Oh, shit. It's a good
And it is a really interesting sound, because I don't know about a pack of dogs, but it is like an alien language. It's like, there's definitely communication, there's definitely a language, but it's not one you ever heard before.
Yeah. Oh shit, I have to find this. Yeah. I mean, I already love records when there's two bass players, that one is in the high register, one is there, and then, but four of you guys, that's like, wow, okay. That's a scary one, but cool. But all monsters, of course, in the instrument. I love them. Beautiful. But Michael, I wanted to ask you also about your band leading. You did it on the West Coast. When you came to New York, how did you continue that? And also, are you still, like, as a band leader, not in a duo concept, doing something new now, or?
No, I have to say that my records as leaders, I really love them, but I've never seemed to be able to get them work. Like the last quartet it was with Matt Maneri, Whit Dickey, and Carl Berger.
Wow,
and this was a phenomenal band. Carl, God rest his soul, is gone now, but even then he needed a certain level of comfort in order to travel, which doesn't happen often, let's say. But I love that band. And before that was the band with Fred Lomberg Holm and Kirk. Another great band. Now all these bands would still be active, except I never found them enough work. I mean, we all worked some, but we never got to Europe. None of them did.
Really? Oh, wow. Interesting.
Yeah. A Quartet, I think, is one of my, even now, that's one of my top 3 favorite records. And that was such a great band. We worked a handful of times. Yeah, I think about that lately because I have had good opportunities to lead great bands.
Yeah.
But yeah, I could never translate it to work.
Mm.
I mean, in a consistent manner.
Yeah.
And so eventually, you know, people got to do what they got to do and whatever.
Yeah. No, it's hard. I mean, yeah, it's hard. It's especially flying 4 people, let's say, from the States to Europe and actually not losing too much money, almost like that. And yeah.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And I think, you know, it's partly because this is something I've always tried to change. And I don't know if I well, I haven't done it completely, obviously, but it seems like in particular, a bass player's worth is who he's played with, not, or he, or she, or they. It's not, you know, as a leader, you know, there's still not the amount of recognition that there's, you know, it's almost like a novelty.
Really? You think so? Wow, interesting.
Some weird way. Well, you know, we could start naming leaders as bass player leaders, and even if we named all of them, you know, probably that are current today, we probably have enough fingers, which if you talked about all the bands out there is not.
Yeah, it's definitely less than, let's say, saxophone players or trumpet or guitar. Sure, I know what you mean. Yeah, no, it's hard. Yeah, it's. But I love those groups. You know, when you play with drums, it's just like you always give such a nice drive with the rhythm section, and that's why I wanted to ask you if you are still leading groups with your groups with drummers and.
Well, you know, if I could find work, I would be.
You would, right? Yeah.
No, I think, you know, besides the music and the spirit, one of the things that's very attractive to me about the duo is it's easier. You know, it's easier to find it work, and it's easier to move it around, and it's easier. Yeah. I mean, Timothy and I will be playing the Earshot Festival.
Oh, beautiful.
In November, and then we have a workshop too, and right now I'm planning a spring tour, which I don't, you know, that's such a, I have to say I feel bad about not finding work for all those bands, and and lately I've thought about it more than usual, because it's like, oh, you get this great band, great reviews, blah blah blah, and you try and you try and you try, and then you run out of try, you know, in a way, you know. I mean, it's.
I know what you mean. Yeah. It's for me. It's also like, I mean, we do it because we obviously love it, but it's. I also have many times these thoughts, like you know, you make a record, you get all these great reviews, okay,
right,
and then like, okay, so like now, you know, it's like, okay, shit, and you know how to get gigs, and it's heavy. It's.
Yeah, it's true. One of the trumpet players I loved, Rob Blakeslee from Portland, Oregon. He would, like, you know, we would tour the West Coast, and he would borrow money to tour.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Because he had all these great reviews, and he knew it was going to happen any second. And it's just like, eventually another sad thing, Rob doesn't play anymore. I mean, he just couldn't do it. And it was just like, oh man. And he was so good.
Yeah, I know him. Yeah.
He still is. He's just not playing anymore.
Wow. It's the nature of the business. It's hard.
Yeah.
It's hard. Yeah. Michael, I just wanted to ask you about one more thing, which is like your connection with younger player. I mean, Kirk Knuffke. Well, he's younger, so. How did you hook up with him? And you also, like, you know, I love the I think the cherry.
Oh, you kind of.
No, I'm saying that I really love your connection with him. Like, how did you hook up with Kirk?
Yeah, well, again, I mean, that connection was instant. It was through Steve Gauci, who played in early Michael Bisio Quartet records. Yeah, so Steve had a band with me and Kirk, and it was just like, wow, man. Yeah, and Kirk is a solid generation younger than me. Um, and he's one of those people who's melodic and avant-garde.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
which suits me fine. So we just toured in June, and we'll be playing in September. Yeah,
Fantastic.
he's a beautiful player, and he's a good friend.
Yeah, that's important. Yeah.
And there's also a certain amount of, I'm very old school, and Carl Berger loved me not only for my playing, because I'm like the guys he used to hang around with in the 60s. And Kirk is like that too. I mean, it's very easy. As you know, you can have great players, but once you get on the road,
Oh, sure.
things
Yeah.
can go sideways very quickly.
Yeah.
And so, when you find somebody who you're musically connected to, and it's easy to be on the road, that's gold.
That's it. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
gold.
Yeah. True. You mentioned tomorrow you're recording with Matthew, and some tours coming up September and October.
Yeah.
What's on your schedule still? Like, do you have some other recording dates coming up, or?
Well, I have a piece of paper right here.
Okay.
Because I often forget all these things,
Sure.
But last March, and actually like starting almost a year ago, I became aware of this young woman Korean pianist, Une Young.
Okay.
And she has a solo record and a quartet record, I believe, on ESP. Well, I heard the solo stuff and I flipped out. So I contacted her, and last March she came and we recorded duos and quartets with Joe McPhee and Jay Rosen.
Oh man, beautiful.
Yeah, and this record is magic. This is like stupid beautiful stuff.
It's out already, or?
No, it'll come out in September. It's
Oh
supposed
man,
to
I have to find that. Okay, cool.
And then another really long-term relationship I have is with Tani Tabal, the great drummer from Roscoe Mitchell.
I didn't know that. Wow, really?
Tani, yeah. And Tani, I've been a member of Tani's trio with the young saxophone player, Adam Siegel, who's just off the charts good. He's the only person I ever wanted to mentor, and he does not need me to mentor him. And Tani has a new record coming out, which actually this one is a quartet record with Adam and Joe McPhee.
Wow, okay.
And that'll come out on, I hope I'm saying this right, Mahakala, which is a kind of new label, Chad Fowler's label. And that'll come out in October, I believe. Okay. And I also have a couple of other ESPs coming out.
Oh, okay.
Paul, a great friend of mine for many years, Paul Harding, is also a great poet. I mean, just phenomenal. And we've been doing poetry and bass for almost 40 years. I mean, when our kids were infants, they were toddlers, not infants. And we've been doing it forever. And so last summer, I asked him to come up, and we went into the studio and did a bunch of tracks. And I was really fortunate to also, my neighbor at the time was Juma Sultan, who was a great percussionist. In fact, he played Woodstock with Jimi Hendrix.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Right.
And so half the tracks have Juma on it as well. And so that's really a very special record. I mean, that's a record that was 40 years thinking about it. And then just in June, Matt Walerian, who's a young Polish clarinetist who Matt Shipp really champions. Well, he came to play. We played the Matthew Shipp Quartet at Vision Fest. And then Matt and I did a trio with Matt Maneri.
Wow, man, beautiful.
Yeah, up in Kingston, and that was recorded live. It was a concert. And then we went into the studio, that trio went into the studio, and we recorded also with Elliot Sharp on guitar.
Really? Oh,
so
man.
That's going to come out as a double disc.
Woo. Okay, that's a lot of music.
Yeah, I think that covers it for the rest of the year.
Man, I have to get these records.
Yeah.
Wow. Oh, you and Elliot, like, did you guys ever play before together?
No.
Wow.
No, and in fact, Matt Valerian set it up so we didn't hear Elliot. Elliot played at the same time we did. Elliot could hear us, but we weren't allowed to hear him.
Whoa, really?
Yeah.
How does it sound, the record?
I don't know.
Oh, shit, man. Okay, wow. That's a cool one.
I'm assuming it's great, but I don't know.
Interesting concept.
Yeah, okay. Elliot was a great guy, and of course, genius dude.
Sure.
But he was that was the first time we actually met too. Actually.
Wow. Interesting concept. Okay. Really curious. Okay. Cool. Right. Cool, Michael. I mean, yeah. Thanks for sharing some of these thoughts, man. I appreciate it. And
thank you, Samo. It's really been wonderful.
Yeah. So it's a